So good morning, everybody. Morning to the survivors of yesterday's all-day Lojong presentation. Did you have dreams of giving and taking dancing through your heads last night? I won't ask what you dreamed about. Okay, we had enough confessions going on yesterday. Okay, so those of you who are just joining us this morning as part of the normal Lamrim class, we've been having a whole weekend teaching on a text called the 7-Point Thought Transformation. And so I know we've just started the Sunday morning Lamrim class. We've only barely just covered the precious human rebirth and a little bit about death and impermanence, which are the first two topics. So we're daringly leaping ahead to the highest scope of the teachings. I figure you can all handle it. I have faith in you. So we're leaping ahead to a text explaining the development of bodhicitta, which is the highest level of aspiration. For those of you who are in that class, the first class, I talked about the three scopes, the three levels of motivation for doing the practices, and the highest level of scope is this wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. So we're sort of leaping ahead to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll go back to the lower scope next week. This is sort of a treat for everyone. Preview of things to come. Preview of bodhicitta to be developed, okay? And the text we've been doing this weekend is a genre of teachings that I said called Lojong, or thought transformation. And there's two main ways of developing bodhicitta, this thought that wishes for the enlightenment for all beings. And one is called 7-Point Cause and Effect, not to be confused with the 7-Point Lojong. It's another set of 7. And it mostly has to do with thinking of all beings have been your mother in some past life. We've had infinite past lives, infinite mothers in all of these lives. So it has to do with thinking that at some point in some life, all of these beings have been our mother. They've been so kind to us, meditating on the kindness of the mother and thinking we have an obligation to repay their kindness by developing ourselves, developing bodhicitta. Okay? And then the other genre, or the other kind of tack, is called exchanging self and others. And what this says is, no matter what, it doesn't really matter so much if these beings have been related to me. The fact is, we're all beings, we're all subject to the same suffering. Everybody wants happiness, and everyone wants to be free from suffering. So just because other beings are suffering, they deserve our help, So that's the point. And this text belongs to that second track of developing bodhicitta based on exchanging self and others. And the main point of this says, because of this self-cherishing that we have, that's due to innate ignorance of thinking that there's this solid, self-existent, self that we have to protect and fight to, keep the bad stuff away, try and get the good stuff, all of this struggle that we carry out, which is just based on this hallucination of the self that, according to Buddhism, doesn't exist in the way we think it does. So this gives rise to all of this mental afflictions. The main ones are attachment, aversion, gives rise to all of this self-cherishing behavior. And this text says, forget about it. It never did you any good. What's the proof? We're not enlightened beings yet. If this worked, if this self-cherishing business worked, we'd be Buddhas by now, because we've been doing it since beginningless time. And these teachings say, forget about it. Just turn it around. Turn that self-absorption completely around, and look out for other people first. Like really radical techniques of turning around the self-cherishing. Okay, so that's what we've been talking about all weekend. And what we're going to talk about this morning, as I knew that there would be other people coming to Sunday morning that haven't had the whole text, there's one piece of the text that's called integrating a practice for the entire lifetime, So we're going to just talk about this piece, which is a nice kind of standalone piece that I thought would be appropriate for everyone. And you don't necessarily have to have, attended the entire weekend. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about. Everybody's always talking about, how do I practice in daily life? Because for most of us, we don't have a whole lot of time sitting cross-legged on the cushion, you know, and if we're going to waste 23 out of the 24 hours, you know, subtracting the 1 hour that we have to do formal meditation session, we're probably not going to make a whole lot of progress, you know. If you get up off your cushion, just forget about everything else. You're not going to make progress. So this portion of the text have all of these keys about how to meditate and how to practice in daily life. So that's what we're going to be going through this morning. Okay, any questions about that? All the terminology I'm using familiar enough? Okay, great. Okay, and what we're going to be talking about first is the portion of the text called the 5 powers, the integrated practice of a single lifetime. Okay, and the root text that we have called the kindness of others, and I'll just read out for those of you that don't have a copy of the text. It's just one stanza, and it says, in brief, the essence of the instruction is to train in the 5 powers. The 5 powers themselves are the great vehicle's precept on the transference of consciousness. Cultivate these paths of practice. And so, like in most other places in this text, the text itself is very brief. You know, it's sort of this pithy reminder about these practices. So that's why you need to study it. That's why you need a commentary. Otherwise, this wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't know what on earth these 5 practices that they're talking about are. Okay, so we'll go over them. There's 2 sets of 5 practices or 5 powers. And one is to be practiced in daily life, and one is the 5 powers to be practiced at the time of death. Okay, so this is a practice to be applied at the time of death. And there was this a lot of popularity about 10 or 12 years ago when the hospice movement was just getting started of POA, transference of consciousness practice, and you saw all over the place these Tibetan lamas were giving instruction in POA, transference of consciousness, which basically involves, you know, a very highly realized being sort of hooking the consciousness of the dying person and sending them to some, you know, pure Buddha realm where they can practice, you know, where they're reborn in their next life and are able to practice. And all the lamas say this 5 powers at the time of death is the most powerful POA practice. Like, forget about all of these other ones. If you can really do these 5 powers at the time of death, that's all you need. You know, this is the only practice that you need, is these 5 powers at the time of death. So we'll talk about those too, both the 5 powers for our daily life now and then what to do at the time of death. Okay. So I've written the 5 powers up on the flip chart, and I don't know if people over there, can you more or less see? Can you see over here? Okay, anyway, I'll read them out, and they're on the handout. Okay, so the first power is called Pempa in Tibetan, and it means the power of determination. Okay, the power of determination. Does everybody have a handout? I made copies. Okay, great. So what's the power of determination? Okay, so this whole text is talking about overcoming your self-cherishing, you know, fighting this tendency we have to look out for number 1, the self-cherishing mind. So what this says is, when you wake up in the morning, set your determination. At the beginning of meditation sessions, we set our motivation. You know, we reflect on our motivation. So this says, at the beginning of the session, lie in bed for a couple of minutes, you know, before you even get up, before you start doing anything, and think about these practices, and think, you know, today I'm going to use my life to benefit other beings. You know, today I'm going to try and overcome my self-absorption, my selfishness, and really try and use my life well to benefit others. Even before that, you can think, you know, it's kind of a miracle that I even woke up this morning. You know, it's amazing. Like Arya Nagarjuna says, it's a total miracle that we wake up every morning. There's so many more causes of death than there are of life. You know, it's just this sort of really transient, you know, state that we're alive, and there's just so many causes of death, you know. And it's kind of a miracle that we even wake up. Think, I have this precious opportunity in this life. You know, I've had these teachings, I have this precious human rebirth. It's so amazing. So then make the determination to use it really well, to practice like this in this day, to really try and serve other beings, develop your bodhicitta motivation, overcome your self-cherishing. So this is setting the motivation, the power of determination is setting the motivation first thing in the morning for that day, that week, that year, for the rest of your life. You know, really reflect on the don't just leap out of bed and immediately get distracted. You know, it's so powerful if you just set your motivation really clearly early in the morning, you know, and just set that motivation for all your activities for the whole rest of the day. Even if you lose your mindfulness, you sort of like, you know, made this sort of course correction early on and just set yourself pointing in this specific direction. You know, it's not random, like randomly jumping up and then just being subject to whatever happens and whatever thoughts come in your mind. Like you've set your course first thing in the morning. Okay? The second power is called gompa. This may be a familiar word, gompa. We call this room the gompa. Okay? And this word, it's basically the root of the word that means meditation and the word that means familiarity and habituation. It all comes from the same root. Okay? So meditation basically means to familiarize and habituate yourself to something. So in this context, gompa means the power of familiarity. Okay? The power of familiarity. And what this means is just getting used to this idea of taking care of others, of serving others. Just getting used to it, getting familiar with it. You've set your motivation first thing in the morning with your pempa, okay? And then throughout the day, constantly remind yourself to get used to this, so this becomes our habitual way of dealing with reality, okay? Is thinking constantly of taking care of others. Keep reminding yourself. Yesterday in the class, in one of the verses, we had this thing that you could remind yourself with these little phrases from time to time during the day. And there's different phrases that you can use. Somebody said the 8 verses of thought transformation, this thing we have on the trail up at the top of the hill, those are great. You know, those are great. Any of these texts that have to do with thought transformation, of taking care of others. We're going to do a meditation later on. At the end of the meditation, I'm going to do kind of a review meditation and read out some verses from another text that all can be used. So it's nice, you can remind yourself with verses, you know, memorize some of these things and just say them over and over throughout the day. Okay, that's one way to develop this power of familiarity. Another trick that I learned from one of my teachers, it was this Kadampa Lama trick. Every time you change position, remind yourself, okay? If you get up, if you're sitting down and you get up, train yourself. Think of overcoming self-cherishing and benefiting others, you know? Anytime you change position, you get up to walk somewhere, you go to sit down, you go to lie down, anytime you change position, get in the habit of having that trigger a reminder for yourself. And this is a way to train. Because what we're trying to do, this whole thing, lojong, the jong part of the word lojong means training, practice, and it has a connotation of repeating something over and over and over and over again until it becomes habitual. Somebody in a class the other day said, and I never heard this before, he said it takes 28 days to make a new habit. Isn't that interesting? Has anybody else heard that? 28 days. That's great. Like, that's so hopeful. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was years, you know. He said 28 days to make a new habit. So we can totally turn it around, you know. And this is what this power of familiarity says. Like, totally turn around your habit. And use these little tricks to remind yourself. You know, verses that you say throughout the day, you know, reminding yourself every time you change position. One of the things that I talked about last week in class and also a little bit yesterday was carry around a little notebook and a couple of times a day check the state of your mind. And the homework I gave people from last week's class was think in terms of what we call the 8 worldly dharmas, or the 8 worldly concerns that are our motivation for most of our actions. And every couple of hours, pull out this notebook and just check. What's going on with your mind? What's your motivation in that moment? Is it one of these 8 worldly concerns? There's some slogans that go along with this thought transformation that reviewed in the session last night. And I said, pick one of these every day and just check a couple of times a day. And you can do it again at regular periods, like before breakfast, check. the middle of the morning when you take your coffee break at work, check. Before lunch or right after lunch, get in the habit of just checking your mind throughout the day. And this will really reinforce this power of familiarity. Okay. Now the next one is called Karpo Sabun, the power of the white seed. What on earth does this mean? Sesame seeds or what? What are these white seeds? Okay. Now, what this is something I keep harping on over and over and over again, which is purification and accumulation of merit. Okay, so this is the white seed that they're talking about. So in order to have the realizations of the path, we can't just plunk down on our meditation cushion and expect for all of the realizations to come just because we want them. We have to prepare our minds. And the analogy that's used in the scripture is like a rocky, stony, untilled field full of weeds. And if you try and scatter a bunch of seeds on top of that, good luck. Nothing much is going to grow. So you have to prepare the ground first before you plant the seeds. You have to take all the big rocks out, and you need to till it and add a bunch of fertilizer and, peat moss and all of this stuff, and just prepare it well so that it will, when you plant the seeds, they'll grow. And so this is the analogy that's used for this purification and accumulation of merit. You need to purify yourself of your past negativities and accumulate a lot of merit so that you'll be able to have the realizations of the path, and then they'll come. Okay? So basically, in terms of purification, and somebody was asking yesterday about the four opponent powers, and somebody was saying, okay, great, throughout all of these texts you're talking about, you can purify, you can purify, you can purify. Could you please talk a little bit about how to do it? So I'll just mention these four opponent powers briefly now, and then later on for the Sunday morning class we'll talk about karma, and we'll get into them a little bit in more detail. Now, a little caveat. Just because you can purify karma, it doesn't mean that you can just do whatever you want and then say, oh, it's okay if I break all these vows because I've got the four opponent powers, and I'll just purify it tomorrow. And the analogy they give is a broken leg. Sure, if you have a broken leg, it'll heal, but it's never quite as good as it was before. It's not as strong as it was before. I know, I have several breaks in my left leg from a car accident in 1982, and I still limp when it's really cold and damp. It's like that. It was, it's never going to be like it was before I had that car accident. So it's like this. So don't break your vows in the first place. Don't create negativity in the first place. But if you do, you can purify it with the four opponent powers. And you'll see one of the powers is determining never to do that action again. So it's sort of like you can't just go around mindlessly breaking your vows because then you're not even using all four of the opponent powers. Okay? So the first power is the power of regret. The power of regret. Okay? And this arises as a result of having faith in the law of cause and effect. Okay? So you really need to understand karma. And I mentioned this yesterday with this thought transformation. You really need to understand emptiness and karma in order for this to work. Otherwise you think, what's the big deal? Why can't I just grab, get whatever I want, get happiness by whatever means I want? It works. What's the big deal? But you have to understand karma and the laws of karma. And so the power of regret is this, and it's really different from guilt. Okay, it's really different from guilt. Lord Buddha didn't say wallow around in guilt and feel like worthless and horrible because you did a bad deed. Lord Buddha said, get smart. Get smart and realize, because of the law of cause and effect, you are going to experience the result. And the analogy that's given in the text of this is the feeling of, let's say that there's 3 people go into a bar. And they sit down, and the bartender pours 3 shots in front of each of them out of the same bottle, The first one downs his shot. The second one downs his shot. A minute later, the third one downs his shot. The first one keels over dead off the stool. A minute later, the second one keels over dead. What does the third one feel like? Oh my God, I just totally blew it. I just drank poison instead of a shot of tequila or whatever it is. And that's the kind of feeling of an intelligent, educated Buddhist is, you do something and then you just have this feeling of, I just blew it karmically. You know, it's different from guilt. It's just regret, like the intelligent regret of an educated Buddhist saying, I will experience the result of this action, you know, so I've got to do something about it. And so that's what the power of regret is, okay? So it's a different flavor than like, oh, I'm born in sin, original sin, I'm, you know, tainted forever. It's not about that at all. Okay, it's not about guilt. Okay, the second power is called the power of the basis. So basically all of our negativities we do in relation to either Buddhas or sentient beings. You know, you break the vows that you made in front of Buddhas and your teachers, or you commit negativities in terms of sentient beings. So the power of the basis means kind of rely on these objects by taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Okay, so before you do your purification action, you take refuge and generate bodhicitta, because these are, you know, the Buddhas and sentient beings are who you've committed the negativity in relation to, so you're sort of relying on them. And the analogy they use is when you fall down on the ground, use the ground to kind of push yourself back up again. And this is a little bit subtle, but it's mostly about the two objects of all of our negativity. So it's sort of like confessing to them, you know, and asking forgiveness from Buddhas and sentient beings. And the way you do that is by taking refuge and generating bodhicitta, motivation. Okay? Now the third is the power of the antidote. And this is the actual antidote that you use for the purification. Okay, the thing that you do that actually, you know, based on your regret and on your reliance in the Buddhas and on sentient beings, and then you do something to make up for it. Your make-up activity, your antidote for your negativity. Okay, and there are 6 of them traditionally mentioned in Scripture, and I'll mention them first of all. Reciting the names of Buddhas, reciting mantras, and one example that some of you may know of is Vajrasattva practice. This is a meditational deity whose energy is all about purification, and you do a visualization and mantra recitation in relation to this meditational deity. Reciting sutras, meditating on emptiness, making offerings, and making images of Buddhas. And an example would be satsas, like we have a table in back, these little images of Buddhas made out of plaster. Okay? And then after listing all of these, the lamas always say, in any virtuous activity that you do with the motivation that that's your make-up activity, that's your antidote. Okay? So you can get creative about this, and it's very interesting. I had a friend who was in the Israeli army in the Six-Day War. And so he didn't know for sure that he'd killed anyone, but he thought he probably might have. So he went to his lama, who was Lama Zopa, and said, you know, what can I do as my antidote for my possible killing karma? And Lama Zopa said, be a vegetarian for the rest of your life, you know? So that was his antidote activity. And you can see, you can apply like a direct antidote. If you know you've done, especially some big heavy karma like killing, you know, you can think of or talk to your spiritual teachers to sort of engineer an antidote activity that makes sense for you, that's a direct antidote to that, you know? It's interesting. There's another example. This woman came to me and she had a son who'd been in the military and had been involved in like military activity in this certain country, and after he got out of the military he had a lot of regret. Like he wasn't even a Buddhist, but he just had regret about his involvement in this military activity. So as a volunteer, his volunteer work, he raised money for an orphanage in this country, you know, because he felt like he'd probably been responsible for creating some of those orphans in the first place. So, you know, even though not as a Buddhist, but just as a normal person, he just felt obligated to, you know, support an orphanage in that country. So there are a lot of examples about things like this that you can do. Another story from this friend of mine who used to teach in a Kalmuk Mongolian community in New Jersey. You know, there were all these Kalmuk Mongolians that lived, and they all kept sheep for food in their backyards. And one of the young men had been in the Vietnam War, and he came back. And again, he didn't know for sure that he'd killed anyone, but he thought it was quite possible. And his lama said, I know that your father has 2 sheep. Buy those sheep from your father and keep them alive until they die a natural death, you know? So he did. He liberated these sheep and kept these sheep alive. And then he was like, I didn't know how long sheep live. I think they were like 30 when they finally died of old age, and they're sort of hobbling around on canes like, who knows how long sheep live? They usually don't live that long. So he did this as a specific make-up activity. And a lot of times the lamas say if you're experiencing some kind of illness, liberate animals, And this happens at Lama Zopa's house, like quite often that people come. And this friend of mine says, oh, it's great. Every time I go to Long's, I just buy a lipstick and a bunch of worms, and liberate them in my backyard. It's like you can liberate animals, especially ones that are, definitely destined to be killed. I used to try and go out and buy, in pet stores, they have these little mice that are going to be fed to the snakes and stuff, and to me that's just like so horrifying. And so I'd buy all these little mice and feed them and then kind of let them go in the fields and things like that. And I don't know if they made it. A lot of them were white, and they probably didn't have the genetics to make, but still, at least they didn't die this horrible death at, in the jaws of some awful snake, hopefully. I don't know. But anyway, to me, they were cuter than worms. I don't know, the worm thing never really worked for me. So these are this antidote activities, okay? Yeah. Fifth of which of the list? Making offerings, meditating on emptiness, making offerings. So that's practicing generosity, one of the perfections of the bodhisattva. Okay. And then the last one is the power of refraining. Promising not to do the activity again. And this is why you can't get away with just breaking your vows right and left and thinking that you're going to purify. Because part of the opponent power, part of what makes your purification work is saying, I'm not going to do it again. Okay, power of refraining. And you can promise for as long as you feel like is a reasonable period of time. Okay, be realistic about it. Don't say, oh, I'll never again in my entire life, lie. Like, if you don't think that it's possible, say, okay, a week, a month, a year, whatever, and you can do this. You can set time limits on this. I've heard two different lineages of training, and one says, set a time limit so you don't set yourself up for, like, making promises to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas you can't keep, and one lineage says, go for the big time. Just say you're never going to do it again, So I don't know. See which works better for your mind, okay? Two different ways of doing it. But you can kind of set it for specific periods of time if you think it's something, that's really hard to never, ever, ever do again. You can set a time limit on it. Okay, so these are the four powers. The other half of the power of the white seed is creating virtue. Creating virtue. Okay? And there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. The big three, the top three for accumulating merit, the biggest ones are serve the Dharma in whatever way you can. Okay? These are the teachings that liberate all beings from suffering. If you want to help people, this is the best way to help people, just by, doing whatever you can to serve the Dharma, spread the Dharma, do whatever you can to serve the Dharma. That's a big, 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 powerful virtue. It's great to work in soup kitchens, it's great to work in homeless shelters, it's great to help beings in all of these different ways. And we have to do all of that too. We definitely have to do all of that too. But the real thing that's going to liberate people, absolutely from suffering is Dharma practice and just becoming liberated from the whole cycle of existence. So this is a very high priority, is serving Dharma whatever way you can. Now, I'm going to embarrass somebody in this room, but I'm just using it as an example. It's not about you, Michael, but I just have to mention. For example, there's somebody sitting in the back of the room that every time there's a teaching at LMB, he comes an hour early to make a fire and get the warm, that room all nice and warm, and he puts out all the cushions, and he scurries around boiling water and buys cookies at Trader Joe's and brings, and, does all of these things with such incredible, joyful effort that we feel like it's totally okay to ask him when we need help, because it's like you go up to him and you go, Michael, thank you so much for setting out the cushion. And he's like, dude, man, like, I don't want to be a slacker. I don't want to, like, waste my precious human rebirth, you know. And this is it. It's just this great attitude without any resentment, like, out of all that he's getting out of all these teachings. And now he's, like, going to slink off and never be heard from again. And so, but really, I mean, it's so incredible to have somebody like that, because it's like, I'm not just saying this because I live at LMB and we need help, even though I do live at LMB and we do need help. But it's like, this is the attitude that you have of just serving the Dharma, you know, and it's putting out cushions and boiling the water and making the fire, you know, and then he's creating the cause that one day he's going to be up here going blah, blah, blah instead of me. Like, I'll be able to take a vacation and he'll be up there, you know. So this is one of the powerful ways to accumulate merit, is serving the Dharma, okay? Studying emptiness. This is a big one too, studying emptiness, because this is the key to cut through the ignorance that gives rise to all of our mental afflictions. So studying emptiness is a big one. Practicing compassion, serving sentient beings, working in the soup kitchen, you know, helping the homeless people, going to old age homes and visiting people, practicing Tonglen meditation, which we'll be doing this later on this morning about 11:30. Yeah, this is all part of practicing compassion. So these last two, as you can see, we talk about the teachings being in relationship to method and wisdom. You know, and the method side is developing the compassion side of practice, and the wisdom is meditating on emptiness. So these last two relate to both of these. They're called the wings of the bird. Without these two, the bird can't fly, method and wisdom. So the last two are, you know, working on method and wisdom. Now, you don't get to Buddha paradise by being just nice, you know? You have to go for the big guns in terms of your virtue. One of my teachers says, be a virtue pig, you know? Just be a virtue hog. Like, just go for it. Just go for virtue. You know, you can't just do these small, sort of wimpy, nice acts and expect to create the causes to be a fully enlightened being, you know? So just really think, you know, in terms of your morality, there's this great quote by Padmasambhava Guru Rinpoche, and he says something like, my view is as vast as the sky and my actions are as fine as flour, right? And so think of this in terms of, you know, your virtue that you create should be as vast as you possibly can make it, and you should just watch your actions like a hawk. Watch your motivation like a hawk, you know? And we've talked about how to get used to this and training your mind that any time, you know, a thought giving rise to some non-virtue just starts to pop up, you're just on it, you know, before it flowers into some action. And I've said more and more, you know, it's this sort of, I don't know, a progression that you go backwards. Like, initially you create some sort of, you'll do something that you regret, create some negativity, and think about it later and have regret. Oh no, I did that. And then you get to a point where you back up a little bit, where you sort of stop yourself in mid-act, or like immediately you feel regret. And then it gets to the point where maybe the thought to do the action starts to arise, but you stop yourself from doing it, but you still want to. And then, like, pretty soon you train yourself where it doesn't even come up anymore, the motivation doesn't come up anymore. So like that. So you kind of go backwards. So watch, you know, first watch your actions of body, speech, and mind. You know, start watching your mind and your motivation and your mental afflictions that give rise to your actions, and practice like that. You know, so we have to just, in terms of purification, you know, don't create the negativity in the first place. Really watch whatever level of vows that you have. If you don't have vows yet, watch the 10 non-virtues. Like, those cover a lot of bases. If you haven't taken any level of vowed morality, watch the 10 non-virtues. And then purify whatever, you know, whenever you mess up, purify. And then, you know, engineer some huge virtue to accumulate merit. Okay, so that's the power of the white seed. Okay, the power of repudiation, or the power of destruction. I kind of like destruction. And the name in Tibetan for this is Sun Jimpa. And it has a connotation in Tibetan of ripping something out by the heart. This is not, you know, this is one of these fierce bodhisattva practices. You're ripping something out by the heart. What are you ripping out by the heart? Who can guess? Self-cherishing. That's what you're ripping out by the heart, okay? This is like the no-holds-barred approach to becoming a bodhisattva. Rip it out by the heart. Whenever you feel the self-cherishing start to arise, which you will, when it starts to show its ugly face in the text, they say, just bash it like you would a thieving dog, you know, and you get this vision of these Tibetan monasteries that have all these dogs that just live off scraps. You know, they don't get Purina, like whatever, dog chow in their bowl every day. They just kind of live off scraps. So you've got this big plate of meat momos on the table, you know, and the Lama like turns around to talk to somebody, and this dog just like lifts its head over the table to steal the momos, and the Lama turns around and just whacks it, you know, get out. So it's like, just slap it down like you would a thieving dog. That's what it says in the text. That's Sunjimpa. Just tear it up. Just power of destruction. And this is where you have to get fierce. You know, you can't be wimpy with your self-cherishing. And there's these great Lam Rim texts, and I want to read out of one called The Wheel of Sharp Weapons. And it's all about destroying self-cherishing. And about halfway through the text, the author calls on the power of Yamantaka, one of these wrathful tantric deities that's all about bashing ignorance. You know, some people are new to Buddhism and they look at some of these, you know, pictures and they go, oh my God, there's this heavy-duty guy with like all these knives and swords and stuff. Like, what's up with this? Well, the knives and swords are all about like destroying your ignorance and self-cherishing and being ruthless. And so about halfway through the text, it segues into this section where the end of every stanza has this refrain that says, trample him, dance on the head of this treacherous concept of selfish concern. Tear out the heart, Sunjimpa, of this self-centered butcher who slaughters our chance to gain final release. Ooh, that's cool. Huh? It's like this samurai approach to self-cherishing. So this is Sunjimpa. And you get this, and like I said, you keep backing up. You know, you watch your, first you regret your actions after you do it. Then you start watching your actions. Then you start watching, you know, your mental afflictions when they arise. And then you just start getting to the point where you can feel it when it just starts to come up, you know. And I had an incident of this. It's really great to be a teacher. You get to confess publicly a lot. You know, you use yourself in your own examples. So just this past week, I had an incident of Sunjimpa that I'd like to share with you as an example. So a bunch of us were sitting out having lunch together, some of the staff and some guests, and we're sitting around, and as one person starts to tell this story about something that happened at Land of Medicine Buddha about 10 years ago in the mid-90s, you know. So he starts to tell this story, and he wasn't there when this thing happened, but he, you know, it was so inspiring for him, he wanted to relate this story to all of us. And so we're sitting there, and then all of a sudden I sort of noticed this sort of sleeping beast that had just been sort of dozing in my chest start to wake up and sort of rise. And it was almost like this physical sensation, and kind of woke up, and it got about as far as here before I became aware of it. And at first, the first manifestation was, hey, wait a minute, I was there when that thing happened. I could tell that story so much better than you, with all of the details, because I was there, dude. Like, you know, everybody's looking at you and paying attention to you, but I could tell the story better. And then they'd all be looking at me, you know? So that was the first thing that happened. And then the second thing was, plus, I was there with Lama Zopa. Like, I'm such a big deal, you know, that I was there with Lama Zopa when this thing happened. So, you know, and then I was just like, girlfriend, just shut up, you know, like, just give it a rest. This has nothing to do with you. Just shut up, you know? And I just tried to Sunjimpa my thing, and so I'm going through this battle, and I'm like bashing this thing that's like, trying to lunge out. And like trying to tell the story better, and like I'm such a big deal, and it's like this war going on inside, you know. And of course I'm just sitting there smiling, looking attentive, like looking at him, you know, in this whole interior war. And it was not easy. I was like, you know, trying to bash this self-cherishing that wanted to tell it better and more importantly and blah, 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 blah. And this sort of relates to something we were talking about yesterday. We had this whole precept all about act natural. You know, don't make a big deal. out of your Lojong practice. So this whole battle is going on inside, but I didn't let on that I was struggling. I didn't leap up and start dancing around the swimming pool chanting, trample him, dance on his head, you know. It's like I sat there quietly going through my struggle inside. And so this is Sunjimpa, okay? Like you feel it come. And then with practice, you feel it, like I said, right when it's about here. It just starts to wake up and try and motivate you to say something stupid and self-cherishing and be a big deal and like toot your own horn and all of that stuff. So you just bash it. You do a Sunjimpa on it. So this is an example from my own experience. Just a few days ago this happened to me. So this is how we practice with Sunjimpa. Okay? Now the last one is Monlam, the power of prayer. The power of prayer. And this relates to dedication. At the end of all of our meditation practice, we dedicate the merit. So this says, right before you go to sleep at night, review your day. See how you've done. Okay? See how much Sunjimpa you engaged in, you know? See how your Pempa and your Gompa went. Like, did you remember throughout the day? Did you remind yourself, was there a time when your self-cherishing came up and you were able to successfully bash it? So just review and just dedicate the merit. You know, dedicate your practice of all of these other powers throughout the day to two things. To be able to see emptiness directly and to be able to develop your bodhicitta. Okay, these are the two big things that you dedicate for. You know, to become an Arya Bodhisattva, basically. To develop your wish to become enlightened for the benefit of others, develop the view of reality, the way it is, the true nature of reality, okay? So this is the power of prayer that you do at the end of the day. That's basically dedication. Yeah?
You're dedicating to be able to see emptiness?
Yeah, for basically for method and wisdom, you know, to be able to develop compassion and ultimately bodhicitta, motivation, and then for wisdom. So method and wisdom are the two big things that you dedicate. So like we were saying yesterday, just put it in your karmic bank account. You know, you have this karmic bank account for your future enlightenment. So stow it in there at the end of the day by dedication. Okay? That means that all your virtue, it's sort of stamped, sealed, it's in the bank account, it can't be destroyed, can't be stolen. It's there. Okay. So these are the 5 powers in daily life. So before we go to the 5 powers at the time of death, are there any questions about those comments? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, you weren't here. Okay, bodhicitta is this mind that wishes. It's got 2 parts. It's wishing for enlightenment, so it's wishing to become a Buddha, and then the reason is to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so this is more than just liberation from cyclic existence. That's relatively easy. You can get liberated from cyclic existence, go off into nirvana, which is called like personal peace, no more problems, no more mental afflictions, or you can develop the aspiration to become a fully enlightened being, a Buddha, who has a lot more qualities and a lot more capacity to benefit beings. And the only reason for doing this, the only reason to bother to become a Buddha is because of these qualities that you have that will benefit all sentient beings. So that's called bodhicitta, or the mind of awakening. So yeah, that's what all of these practices are engineered for. Okay. Yeah.
Where I'm noticing self-cherishing in someone else, and feeling challenged by that, but it feels like then it's complicated by like feeling my own self-cherishing because they're self-cherishing. You know,
What do you mean feeling your own because you're seeing theirs? How does that go?
You know, not even look at her, not even aware that self-absorption is being expressed.
Yeah.
So that feels like that empowers my own.
Yeah. One of the little slogans, well, 2 of them actually, that we had last night in the teaching, and I'll share them with you now because they're really appropriate, is don't bother with other people's faults and mistakes. You know, it's basically like, sure, you're going to see faults in people all over the place. You're going to see them making all kinds of mistakes. Just don't even be bothered by it at all. Like, just look at your own mind. You know, we're so sort of checked out, if we spent the energy looking at our own mind and our own motivation as we do paying attention to what other people are doing, we'd probably be enlightened by now. So it's just like, don't worry about it. I mean, for one thing, you don't have clairvoyance. You have no idea what their motivation is. They could be doing it just to teach you a lesson. And I gave an example of somebody that was behaving in a certain way that just completely mirrored my own control freakhood, and really showed me what it was like for other people to be around me. And it was great, and it's like I could have just sort of externalized it and judged her and said, oh, look at her, I can't believe she's acting like that. Take it all as a lesson. They could be a bodhisattva manifesting that just to teach you a lesson. It's quite possible. And I say, the most obnoxious, irritating people in your life are the ones that, are in high likelihood bodhisattvas emanating to teach you patience and to show you something about your own mind. So I think if we go through with this attitude of being like highly suspicious, especially of the really annoying ones, it really helps. And then that helps your practice. Now, on the other hand, if you see somebody engaging in some activity that you feel like is really deeply negative, like that they've taken a certain vow and they're in the middle of engaging in some activity, out of kindness and compassion and concern for them, you can, just check in with them and say, oh, hey, what's up with this? Like, are you sure you want to do this? But in a really skillful, kind way, not out of judgment and not out of saying, you're wrong for doing that. So just take all of those things you see as a mirror for your own stuff and as a lesson, and think that they're just emanating that to teach you something. And that's really the most beneficial way, I think, to relate to it. Yeah? Yeah. Not easy. Anything else? Yeah? Yeah.
But if you're trying to become a Buddha in order to liberate sentient beings, it seems like there's this double view of like, are they sentient beings or are they? Because if they're not sentient beings, then why are you trying to become a Buddha?
Right, right. And I think it's just to keep an open mind and to say you don't know. And the best way to use it as a training, like they say a lot of times, this tantric pure vision thing of seeing everybody as a Buddha, it's a technique. It's not like a philosophically valid that everybody really is a fully enlightened being necessarily, but it's just a trick. It's sort of like the analogy that Lama Zopa gives is like, for example, in Master Shantideva's A Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, when he's talking about patience, he talks about become just like a lump of wood, and he keeps saying become like a lump of wood, and Lama Zopa says he's not telling you to actually become a lump of wood. This is just a technique of how to practice. And so this thing of seeing everyone, of just being suspicious of everyone, that they're a potential bodhisattva trying to enlighten you, is a technique to use to kind of deal with the arisal of your mental afflictions in the moment. And it doesn't mean that you philosophically necessarily really think that everybody is, but you don't know. Yeah, you have no idea. You have no idea. Yeah. And that's hard. That's a hard one, because you're trying to kind of do the two things at the same time, But yeah, that's hard. Yeah.
That whatever the person's behavior is, at root, if they really, drop down to their deepest heart, they wouldn't want to hurt you, and that they can benefit from it.
Yeah. But it is that thing, just philosophically, but it's just keeping an open mind and not reacting to them out of your mental affliction, always sort of suspecting they could be just a Buddha man. Like there's the possibility, there's the chance that it's that. And then that just helps you cut through your own affliction towards them. It's like if the angry person screaming at you is an emanation of Yamantaka, or is it just some really deluded person yelling at you, like it's better for you to think that there's somebody trying to teach you patience, because then you're not going to react.
The person yelling at you can actually develop more compassion, whereas if you see it as...
Well, we can't help it. We're not going to be able to see everybody as Yamantaka all the time. Like in the way that we are now, we'd be successful if like 1% of the time we could pull off seeing them as a bodhisattva trying to, emanate to help us. I'm just saying to counteract our thing of reacting and our self-absorption and self-cherishing and like popping off and yelling at them, try this as a technique to counteract that. Okay? Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Can you describe sentient beings
Okay, sentient beings is the word in Tibetan sem chen means mind possessor. Okay, so it's basically any being that possesses a consciousness, which in Buddhism is explained as they could be born in any one of 6 realms in our realm of existence. So it's humans, animals are considered sentient beings, and then these other beings that are born in the other realms, like hell realms. Buddhism talks about hell realms, these realms of intense suffering. Hungry ghost realms, realms where beings are just filled with this unsatisfied desire. Also, there's 2 God realms that are spoken about. And then there are 2 higher realms, the formless realm and the form realm and the formless realm. So all of these realms have beings, and it just means, sentient just means possessing consciousness, possessing a mind. So in Buddhism, for example, plants wouldn't be considered sentient beings. Plants wouldn't be considered. Sometimes there can be certain spirits that inhabit trees and things like that, but the plant itself isn't said to have consciousness. Okay, so that's what sentient means, mind possessor. Okay, yeah. Anything else? What's the indication?
Yeah, why won't a tree have?
I don't know. Holy beings say that. I'm not quite sure how they know for sure.
There precursors that show if something has consciousness.
What do you mean precursors?
Like it has to perform certain functions or be able to do certain things, or there isn't anything, it's just based on belief.
I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that question. It's sort of like it's taught that there are these realms and that these are the beings that are considered sentient beings in the realms, but how that's determined in the first place and why plants wouldn't be considered, and what the criteria is for that, I've never had teachings on that. I don't really know. That's something, maybe I'll try and check up on that. I'm sure there is something in logic, probably, Dignagar, Dharmakirti, and all of these logic texts. I'm sure there's some proof for why these things are sentient beings and why something like a plant wouldn't be, and I just don't know. But I'll check.
A lot of us might feel very strongly that plants are alive.
Well, they're alive. They're definitely alive. They're just not conscious, And actually in the Vinaya, in the rules for monks and nuns, you're not supposed to go destroying plants. Like we have vows about not destroying plants. So they're definitely to be respected, and it doesn't mean you go down, cutting down forests and things like that. But they're just not seen to possess the same kind of consciousness as a human, as an animal, and as these other realm beings. But it's definitely not that they're to be totally disrespected either, that they are living beings. Yeah, but as far as the proof of sentience, I don't really know exactly. Okay. No, it's okay. You ask good questions. I like it. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Do you have any example of an antidote for something that's less extreme than killing?
Yeah, okay. Let's say that for years and years and years, you worked for a really big company, and you thought it was no problem at all to take boxes of Bic pens from the storeroom of your company because it's like IBM and they're, multinational, and plus they do all these terrible things and poison the environment, so you're just sort of getting back at them for doing this thing, According to Buddhism, that's still the karma of stealing because you're taking something that hasn't been offered. And so the antidote to that would be some kind of generosity as an antidote for stealing. Okay? And we do this. We justify, right? Because of not really understanding the law of cause and effect, we justify, a lot of negativity in terms of it won't matter to them, and beside they're the bad guy, and so I can do whatever I want. So that's classic wrong view in Buddhism. So you just do some generosity, or you return the pens, for crying out loud. You've stolen 5 boxes of Bic pens from the storeroom, sneak in the middle of the night. Confess to somebody first, tell the person you did it. I mean, that's the really hard part. But it's part of purification too, is just to acknowledge that you've done something. So all of these little things, think of the opposite of what it is that, what you did, and all of these 10 non-virtues have appropriate opposites that you can engage in as the antidote action. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, in what way?
On the hospital. You know, I'm working on hospital. I need normal saline, and I actually asked somebody else. Is that still?
Yeah. Is there, well, yes. Basically because you're taking something that's not offered. I mean, because your motivation is good, it helps a little bit mitigate it, but it's definitely stealing if you take something. Anything that you take that's not offered is considered stealing. So I would try and figure out a different way to get it. Even the $10 on the floor. Tibetan lamas, if they're walking down the sidewalk and they see a $10 bill dropped on the sidewalk, they won't touch it for anything in the world because it hasn't been offered to them. So yeah, even things that are lying around, I don't do that anymore. Things that are lying around, because that person didn't release it. They didn't release possession of it. You know, they dropped it by mistake. And the grape at Safeway. Anything that hasn't been offered, including, I had this friend, you know, I told this story last week. I had this friend, and I used to go stay at her house a lot for the weekend. She lived in San Francisco, you know. And we were studying together, studying Buddhism. And there came this thing, you know, and I'd be in her bathtub, taking a shower. And back then I had hair, and I'd be reaching for the shampoo. And I was like, that's her shampoo. And, you know, so I'd get out of the tub, wet, go to the door, yell down the hall, can I take, you know, 1 teaspoon of your shampoo? Like, you have to just get so intense about this. And finally, she just made this blanket statement. Anything in my house, the tea bags, the milk, the soy milk, the shampoo. Like, just, you know, don't yell at me every time you want to take something. It's all yours. But you kind of have to do this without everything, because this is the way we train our minds. You know, don't take the grapes at Safeway. Buy them and eat them in the car on the way home. Like it's 10 minutes later, you know. You know, it's like they have these things at New Leaf on the bins, like don't eat out of the bins. You know, just don't do it. Because what are you doing? You know, this isn't about like, you know, I'm not trying to be a big meanie and destroy your pleasure. I'm just trying to destroy your future suffering. If you want abundance in the future, if you want a lot of money to be able to take care of even more dogs in the future, you know, don't steal the saline solution from work. Yeah.
You know, I tried to claim, you know, and Mark wants me to
Good for Mark. Yeah. Yeah. But only 28 days, as we have learned, you can develop a new habit that the last thing on earth you do is nick a grape from the bin at the Safeway. You know, really, like it's the last thing that you do. Yeah. That's all right. Well, if you take it and turn it into the lost and found, that's different. You can do that. You're allowed to pick it up and turn it into the lost and found. But you don't know. The owner might come back for it.
No, you pick it up, give it to the lost and found.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How do you know when you've atoned? Is it something you feel in your heart? Is there a, like, tit for tat kind of thing going
Yeah.
on?
You know, that's a good question. And they say, you know, in the teachings they say when you're doing these purification practices, decide on the amount of antidote that you're going to do, and then at the end of it, you know, feel a strong feeling that I cleaned it. You know, kind of be reasonable. Don't just say, oh, 1 session of Vajrasattva, you know, cleans out some heavy karma, but decide ahead of time, like, I'm going to do this for this reason, to be the antidote for this specific action. And then they say at the conclusion, feel a really strong sense of completion, like, I did it, great, I cleaned it out, I completed it, like that. Yeah?
I'm house sitting for someone, and I don't really know them, I
Mm.
have a number, but I can't call and ask them. But there's some things in the refrigerator that I don't eat meat, but they're going to go bad.
Yeah.
So I was going to take them and give them to actually his ex-wife.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, it feels right, but I'm like, you know, I mean, I'm that basic right now in my life.
I wouldn't do it unless they've given you permission. Or put it in the freezer or something. You know, just stick it in the freezer. Like, I wouldn't just make assumptions like that. Like, better for it to go bad than for you to make assumptions, or, you know, I just wouldn't do that, because it's all about training your mind, you know? Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So let's move on to the 5 powers at the time of death, the most profound transference of consciousness. And so it's the same 5 names, but they have different meanings. Okay? And they're in slightly different orders. So the power of determination, in this case, means the resolve not to become separated from your bodhicitta motivation, even at death and even at the intermediate state between lives. Okay, according to Buddhism, after death, there's what's called a bardo state, or an intermediate state that you're in before your next rebirth. Okay? And so it's this determination not to be separated from this motivation, to keep mindful of it even at the time of death. So you say, I'm about to die. I'm going to go through the death process, the intermediate state, into the next rebirth, but I'm not going to let go of this wish to be of benefit to other people, this wish to help people. Just hang on to it with determination. You know, hang on to that motivation. Say, okay, I'm going to be going through this process. It's going to be really scary. You know, according to the text, it's characterized by these hallucinations, you know, and fear and all of these things. And just say, forget it. No matter what, I'm going to hang on to this motivation, you know, to benefit beings. The power of the white seed. Get rid of all of your attachments before you die. Give everything away before you die. Die clean. You know, get rid of your possessions. Give all your money away. Get rid of your emotional attachments. Say goodbye to everybody. You know. And we have this incredible attachment to our bodies. Like, we really identify with our body. Try and let go of even your attachment to your body at the time of death. Just try and die clean without any attachment. One of the main things that drives our rebirth into the cycle of existence over and over and over again is this grasping and attachment, especially to embodiment. You know, we want to have a body. We want embodiment. We're so used to it. We've been doing it since beginningless time. So we're so attached to our body. And part of what drives us into another rebirth is this grasping at another body. Okay? So just give away everything, you know, all your material possessions, all your emotional attachments. Just try and, you know, die with a clean slate and give up even attachment to your body. Lama Zopa was telling this story about this Lama who was quite ill in a monastery in India, and he practiced this power of the white seed at the time of death and gave away all of his possessions. And then Lama Zopa says, that was 6 years ago and he's still alive. Like, he gave everything away, you know, and he's still alive. But he cleaned up. Like, it was really great, you know. Sort of like, just get rid of everything. Just give it all away. Okay. Now, the power of destruction at the time of death, what this means is confess and retake broken vows at the time of death. You know, restore your vows. Die clean in terms of your morality. If you've taken bodhisattva vows or tantric vows, restore them through the appropriate means. You can retake and renew your bodhisattva vows. If you've taken tantric vows, try and make sure you get a tantric initiation or do self-initiation right before you die, because that renews your vows. So whatever level of morality and whatever vows that you have, if you don't have formal vows, you know, the lamas hear of this Catholic thing of doing confession. They think it's a great idea. Just confess your negativities at the time of death, okay? There may be a couple of things you've never told anyone that you did, you know? Confess. It's a great thing to do at the time of death, because then your mind, you just die clear, you know? So confess at the time of death. Whatever broken vows you have, repair them. Okay, so this is the power of destruction. The power of prayer. Okay, pray that all sufferings and obscurations of others will ripen on you at the time of death. Okay, pray that all the suffering and all of the bad karma of the entire world will come into you and die with you. And we practiced Tonglen yesterday, giving and taking. We'll do it again in about 11:30. We have another meditation session. So Tonglen practice, and we'll go into it a little bit more, is taking all of the suffering into you and using it to destroy your self-cherishing and giving all other beings happiness. Okay? So at the time of death, you're going to experience generally very intense physical pain. There's a lot of suffering involved. Do Tonglen at the time of death. Take all the suffering of the world into you at that moment. Like I was saying yesterday, you know, there's times that because of your karma, you have to be right in the middle of experiencing something incredibly painful. Don't waste it. Do Tonglen and take it on for all others. Take on all the suffering in the world and visualize it dying with you at the time of death. Okay? So this is like the big Tonglen to be done at the time of death. The biggest Tonglen you can imagine. And then they say lie down and die peacefully in what they call the lion posture of the Buddha, which is lying on your right side with your hand under your chin like this. And this has to do with the subtle energy in your body. You know, this has to do with the winds and subtle energy in your body. Apparently to lie on your right side is seen as a really, really beneficial way to go. Okay? So lie down peacefully, doing massive Tonglen at the time of death. Okay? The power of familiarity, having always familiarized yourself with this bodhicitta motivation and overcoming your self-cherishing during life, you can do it at the time of death. Okay, if you're not super duper familiar with this, it's going to be too overwhelming. The pain of death, these hallucinations that you start to experience when you go into the intermediate state, you know, it's really scary. But if you've familiarized yourself with life, the power of familiarity is going to kick in during the death process, and you're going to be able to remember these practices. So dying with this bodhicitta motivation is the best transference of consciousness. It's incredible. Really, really powerful. Okay? And I'd like to read you a quote. Our hero, Geshe Chekawa, the author of this Lamrim that we've been, or the Lojong text that we've been studying all weekend, when he was passing away, you know, he's on his deathbed and his disciples are gathered around and, you know, they're kind of freaked out that he's dying, but he's just this incredible practitioner who just practiced Tonglen his whole life and devoted his whole life to helping others ever since hearing this verse of the 8 verses. And so as he was dying, he was doing this. He was doing the 5 powers at the time of death. And he was thinking about his bodhicitta motivation. And he was doing the great Tonglen of taking on the suffering of the whole world into his death process. And we have his words recorded by his disciples. And at the time of death, he said, "I was praying that I could pass on to the lowest hell for the sake of helping every living being. It's not working. I can't go. All I see before me now is the paradise of enlightenment." So that's it, the power of his practice at the time of death. You know, he's praying out of his incredible bodhicitta to be reborn in the lowest hell. And of course, because of the power of his practice, all he could see was the paradise of enlightenment opening up in front of him. So beautiful. You know, so this is the 5 powers at the time of death. Okay, now the last part of the text, the last point, is the measure of having trained the mind. And we'll go through this and then we'll have a break and come back and do Tonglen meditation. Okay? So the first verse, this is point 5 of the 7 points. Integrate all the teachings into one thought. And what does this mean? All the Dharma that was ever taught boils down to one thing: overcoming self-cherishing. Okay? Developing your bodhicitta. So this just means all the teachings, you know, the essence of the teachings, they all boil down to this one thing of overcoming your self-cherishing and caring for others. Primary importance should be given to the 2 witnesses. And there's an alternative translation to this that says, uphold the chief of the 2 witnesses. Okay, who are the 2 witnesses? Yourself and others. Okay? So this says you're the best judge of your practice. You know what's going on in your mind. You know whether your delusions are decreasing or increasing. You know whether your mind has changed. So don't worry too much about what other people think about you, what they say about you. you're the one who knows if you're practicing properly. You know, don't worry too much about what other people think. You're the judge of whether the practice is working for you. So the chief witness is you. The chief witness is you in your own practice. Cultivate only a peaceful mind. Okay, no matter what's going on externally, just don't be bothered. You know, whether you're rich or poor, praised or criticized, whether things are going well or whether they're not going well, just don't worry about it. Don't be too bothered by it. One of the characteristics of karma is there's this pesky lag time. It takes a while to kick in. So you could be engaging in all kinds of virtue and maybe you won't see the effects immediately, you know. But just persevere and don't worry too much about what your external conditions are at the moment. They're coming from the past. They're coming from actions that you did in the past, okay? Whatever karmic seeds you planted in the past is what's ripening and giving you your experience in the moment. The only thing that you can be responsible for is planting seeds for future, you know, and you may not see the effects immediately. I have this one friend who teaches in New York, and he says, all these people are coming up to him and saying, is it okay for me to kill the cockroaches in my apartment on the Lower East Side, you know? And the response he gives to them is, if, when you were going to smash the cockroach, you felt your own ribs begin to break, you'd never ask me this question, you know? And that's it. Karma has this pesky lag time, and we don't get it because of the lag time. You know, we don't get the relationship between cause and result because it takes a while. So don't be bothered by what's going on in your life right now. It's something that you created in the past, you know, just the only thing that you can do. All these people are like, you know, going to psychics to find out like what they did in their past life. Well, the proof is the life you have now. The proof is your precious human rebirth. You don't need to pay money to some psychic reader to figure out what's your past life. Like, forget about it. You're here in this room. You know, it meant that you practiced unbelievable virtue and made pure prayers in a past life. Otherwise, there is no way on earth you'd be in this room. Don't pay any money to anybody else. And then worry about your next life. That you have control over. Don't worry about the past. What do you have control over? Plant seeds for your future lives right now. Start today. And you will reap the results of that. And there's going to be a lag time. You know, you're not going to feel the good stuff right away, necessarily. And that's why, you know, there's always this question, why do good people suffer? You know, why do the nice guys finish last? And like, why? Well, they're not going to, ultimately. You know, that's the answer. That's the answer because of the law of karma. You know, nice guys really don't finish last. They just finish first a little bit later on. Okay? So this lifetime. Okay. The measure of a trained mind is that it's turned away. There are 5 great marks of a trained mind. Okay, so what are these 5 great marks? You're patient. Your mind won't tend towards delusion no matter what happens. You can endure suffering if doing so enables you to benefit other beings. Okay, so it's this patient mind, especially patience in the sense of being able to endure hardships for the sake of your practice and for the sake of benefiting other beings. The second one, you'll cherish others more than yourself. These are the marks of a trained mind. You know, you'll automatically cherish others more than yourself. You'll always practice virtue. All your activities will become in accordance with the mind training. You'll remain calm, composed, you won't be hurting others, and you'll always keep your vows. Okay, this is when you start to feel the effects of this mind training over time. These are some of the qualities that you'll develop. You'll practice the real Mahayana path, combining the understanding of emptiness with all your activities to benefit others. So the 2 wings of the bird, the method and wisdom. You'll start to really practice both of those. The trained mind retains control even when it's distracted. Okay? So one of the effects that really shows that you've taken this to heart, that you've really, you know, integrated this Lojong practice completely, is your mind remains controlled even when you're distracted. And we talked about this a little bit last night for the people that were here. People were saying, you know, sometimes you're just having a massive mental affliction attack and you kind of can't help it and you react in some kind of way and then you later on you regret it. And I was saying, you know, one of the whole points of practice is just training your mind so that you back up in the process, so it never even comes up, so that your knee-jerk reaction, instead of reacting and retaliating when somebody yells at you, is to feel compassion for them. Poor thing. They're creating so much negative karma for the future. So your knee-jerk reaction becomes compassion instead of anger, instead of retaliation, instead of getting back at them. So this is the measure of a trained mind. Like, even when you're distracted, even in those moments where, you feel like it's justified or things are really intense or there's something, incredible going on, still, you're so well trained. And the analogy they give in the text for this is a rider, a really experienced rider of a horse, right? You first start taking riding lessons, and maybe you get thrown and the horse starts to gallop and you're freaking out and holding on to the mane and stuff. And a really good horseman, somebody who's really well trained, doesn't matter what the horse does, they never fall off. Like, they're so well trained that even if the horse bolts or bucks or whatever, they stay on the horse. So this is the analogy given for this well-trained mind, that you're so well-trained that no matter what's going on, you still maintain your control and you just still do a lojong on everything that comes up, like that's your knee-jerk response, is to transform it, just transform it and do these lojong practices, okay? So that's the measure of a well-trained mind. So this is to show whether you're successful in your practice. Okay. So any questions about, Michael? The great Bodhisattva, Michael.
Applying the 5 powers at the time of death.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like this sort of has the premise that you're going to have a little bit of time before you die. If you're having a snap death, or a heart attack, or you're laying on the side of the road, you got taken out by a truck. Is there one of these that is the most powerful if you only have a matter of seconds? You lose your consciousness.
Yeah, it's true. And I think one of the things is with the power of familiarity, like even if you only have a really, really short period of time, like it, you know that you're dying, you're in the middle of having a heart attack or something and you know that you could be dying. And with the power of familiarity, they kick in like instantly. But I would say, and this is just my own opinion, this isn't anything I've heard from a Lama because I've never heard this question before, I would just say to do the Tonglen at the time of death would be really powerful. Like if you don't have time to do any, you don't have time to give everything away, all of this other stuff, but you would have time at that point of like experiencing that intense, pain and suffering at that moment of death of the heart attack. Just at least try and kick in like a Tonglen thing and take on the pain and suffering of the whole world. I mean, this is just my opinion. It would be interesting to ask like Khensa Rinpoche about that. But just off the top of my head, that seems like that would make sense, at the time of death. What's that? Yeah, and get on your right side, if you can. Yeah, but it's true. And that's exactly the importance of familiarity, because you don't have time, what was the first of the 4, and what was that white scene? Like it, you got it down, so that it just kicks in without even thinking about it. And this is why I'm teaching it to you now, because you got time to get used to it before you die, Yeah, sure. Anything else? Yeah.
Reminded with those words, like on the cross, it's done. You got like, sort of, wrap it up.
What were the words? I didn't hear.
It's done. Are those the words in English? Like Jesus on the cross, the last words he said?
It's
and
finished.
Yeah, it's finished. In Dutch, it is volbracht.
Mm.
The whole thing is done.
Yeah. Well, I think that, the Tonglen thing is the really important thing. Yeah.
Release.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything else?
What's the element of one?
I don't believe you when you say a quick one. You never ask quick one. Just kidding. The great Bodhisattva Mark. Yes, dear.
What's the element that one has to watch in order to do all these practices and not become a raging codependent?
Aha! You missed yesterday. Yeah. The view of emptiness, selflessness is the big key to becoming, the difference between being a raging codependent and becoming a bodhisattva is the view, that it's not about you. You know, so much of what motivates codependent behavior is a feeling of inadequacy coming from its own side, that I'm only worthwhile if I take care of all of these other beings because I'm completely worthless from my own side if I don't. You know, and a bodhisattva is like, there is no self to be insecure. There is no self to have low self-esteem. It's all about completely transcending this sense of ego and this sense of self, you know, and becoming a Buddha, which has nothing to do with me, in order to benefit sentient beings. Now, the actions may seem sometimes the same. However, we talked a lot yesterday about how being a bodhisattva doesn't mean being a doormat and letting people get away with anything and letting them walk all over you. Sometimes you have to be really heavy and wrathful, which we've seen the experience with some of our lamas. Like, they'll totally straighten you out in a really wrathful way. So it's not all about like just being a nice guy and being a doormat at all. It's about benefiting sentient beings in the most appropriate way possible, which sometimes can be harsh. You know, it's not just about being nice, and it's not about enabling, because there's no wisdom in that. You know, when you're in one of those relationships where you're just enabling somebody to carry on with some sort of, you know, inappropriate behavior, there's sort of no wisdom involved in that. So the bodhisattva combines their compassion with wisdom, which means sometimes they have to do things that don't please people. And I think sometimes when I think of it, I think that must be the hardest part of being a lama, is you have to tell people things that they don't like at all, you know, and that they resist. So does that help? It's the view. It's mostly the view.
So how come how come you see the actions of compassion and relief of suffering in this world more done by other traditions than by Buddhism?
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks about that a lot. And he says, for example, Buddhist monastics aren't generally the ones, you know, like Catholic monastics kind of running the hospitals and the schools and things like that. And he says we should learn a lot more from that. And I think it's a combination of things. It's also cultural. Like in Asian culture, we don't have this thing that happens in Christian culture of like this big ideal of service that happens in Judeo-Christian culture. So part of it is cultural. And I think, you know, we're trying, like Thich Nhat Hanh, for example, is really into the socially engaged Buddhism thing, which is becoming more and more prominent. So I think it's balancing out a lot more that people are realizing, okay, great, it's, you know, the ultimate thing is to become enlightened to benefit all sentient beings. In the meantime, make sure they're fed, you know, make sure. And so I think more and more, especially Western Buddhist practitioners that are influenced by that Judeo-Christian ideal of service are balancing it out a lot more. But I think we still have a really long way to go. Definitely. Yeah.
Well, I think it comes right in there. And that's when the self-cherishing comes to maintaining your own physical self, where you have to take care of yourself in order to be here.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I have rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah.
And there's things I have to do in balancing.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
And so I have to cherish
Exactly.
myself
Yeah, yeah.
and care for myself. And we finally have to do this with our diet and our food and a lot of things, which could be all this self-absorption in what we eat and how we exercise and how we this and how we that could be considered self-cherishing, but really it's self-care that allows us to be able to do the practice.
Yeah, that's exactly, and that
And
relates.
that's the wisdom.
Yeah. And the
that's
motivation.
also part of our Western culture, which all of this wouldn't be necessary in the Eastern culture necessarily. But in our Western culture, it's necessary to do the practice here with our culture and what's going on in this age, which you mentioned. This is a tremendous time we're living in right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's
so-
that. I think it's all to do with the motivation. Like, and that relates to the two of the precepts that we had yesterday at the very beginning. Like, don't be reckless. You know, especially the one about don't be reckless. Don't put yourself in danger. Don't think that you're a great bodhisattva and try and break up like a knife fight with rival gangs in South Central LA, and you'll be protected because you're a great bodhisattva. You know, it's like this. Don't be reckless. And I think like realizing the preciousness of your human rebirth and this incredible potential that you have, you know, it's true. Like, you need to stay healthy, you need to get medical treatment, you know, it's not like that at all. But the motivation is, I've got this incredible chance to progress spiritually with this life that I have now. Let me preserve it. You know, let me preserve it. And so it's the motivation that makes the difference. And that's, yeah, and the wisdom that comes from that. So it's like, take medicine, go to the doctor, don't act recklessly out of your bodhisattva motivation, you know, take care of your body, but don't become obsessive about it. You know, you don't need to spend 8 hours at the gym every day to be beautiful either. You know, just sort of be balanced with it. Yeah. Yeah.
See at the time of dying. Came up yesterday about, you know, how fun life is, and you know, at the time of dying, you know, I can't imagine looking back over my life and not being attached to how all the good stuff. There's a lot of physical pleasure, a lot of emotional pleasure. How do you turn that into? You let go of that at the time of dying?
Well, I think really meditating really deeply on impermanence and the transient nature of reality, and like whatever good thing that you have, like there's no problem with enjoying it, but realizing it comes from causes and conditions, it comes from your previous karma that you're having this moment of enjoyment, and then just let it go. Like, don't try and grasp onto it. Like, seeing the transient nature and the emptiness of your enjoyments is the antidote to grasping onto them, you know, and that's so much a part of the root of the path. And they say, like, impermanence is sort of the poor person's emptiness. Like, it really helps you have the same attitude as an understanding of emptiness and of the ultimate nature of reality. And it's like, just get it. That it's like, you know, according to the scripture, it's like, what is it, 52, 54 per finger snap karmic ripenings that just shows you a movie of your own reality. And that's all that's happening. So there's nothing solid about the pleasure. So they come, they go, no big deal. Just let go. Because they are transient and they're, you know, they will go away. So I think really having, and that goes back to the power of familiarity, not only with bodhicitta, but with all the aspects of the path, you know, and it really helps you let go of whatever and just not cling on so much to your attachment to sense pleasures. Yeah. Yeah? Does that help? Okay.
Or if it doesn't predispose us to rebirth in the cyclical, coming back in the same way, sort of thing.
Which part?
The pleasures.
Well, definitely attachment to them does. You know, definitely attachment is really a big part of what, you know, drives your rebirth process, because it's like attachment and grasping, and we're going to do a class on the 12 links of dependent origination, which explains exactly how that process happens. So the more understanding you have of how that process happens, the more you know there's certain breaking points that with your practice you can work to cut the cycle. But for sure, I mean, that's a big part of that link, is like sense pleasure gives rise to a certain feeling, which gives rise to this thought that says, I want more of it, which gives rise to an action, grasping at it, and then that gives rise to the link of becoming, you know, which mostly refers to then you're propelled into a new existence. And so that's a big part of that chain, is those links in the 12 links. So for sure, you know, that's true. And like I said, the better understanding you have of that teaching, the more chance you have of cutting the cycle, and just being so aware of it when it's happening. You know, it's like, if you're having a pleasant feeling, it's coming from some good deed you did in the past, and it's not coming from that object. You know, that object is a certain condition for it, but it's not coming from that. And the best way to perpetuate the cycle of samsara is do something stupid to get more of that thing out there, you know. So the more understanding you have of like karma and how dependent arising works, you know, you just don't have that tendency, and so it really cuts that and helps cut that cycle of rebirth. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, yeah.
12 links class be happening?
We're going to do it at Loud Nelson this coming Wednesday. Yeah. And we're going to do it here on Sunday morning in probably, I'm not sure exactly, I'd have to think of the schedule, about 2 or 3 weeks. When we talk about, yeah, we're going to talk about karma. And so it'll be part of both classes. So we'll do a little bit on Wednesday night at Loud Nelson. Yeah. Because that's the next part of the origin of suffering. We're on the second of the Four Noble Truths, the origin of suffering. And so we talked about karma last week, and we're going to talk about the 12 links